Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 142. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Norman Wolfe. Norman is founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders, a strategy execution consulting company changing business to unleash the power of the human spirit. He's a recognized expert in changing the way businesses work to execute strategy more effectively and rapidly. He brings a depth and groundedness to the art of leadership and creating corporate results that is rare and often sees what others do not. Throughout his career as a chief executive officer, corporate director, and advisor to CEOs, Norman has successfully guided corporations through major transitions, leading to substantial growth, market expansion, and enhanced financial performance. Norman, it's so good to have you on the show today.
Good morning, Naftali. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
My pleasure. Okay, so I shared a lot in that bio, but nobody can say it better than you. As far as your history, your story, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, and more importantly, how you got to the point where you are today in the consulting space, and specifically how you help companies.
So I guess, I start at the beginning, right? I started my career as a computer scientist, if you will, working for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. And like everybody, fresh out of university, I was eager to be successful. And so I began to learn the art of being in business. And but as I was going through that very early in my career, a couple of things were sort of trigger mechanisms. One was I was told by my supervisor, Norman, when you come to work, you leave your personal life at the door. And something about that said, how do you do that? How do you become something other than what you are? The second message I got was you're here to work, not to have fun. If you were here to have fun, you'd pay the company to come to work, not the other way around. Again, it's something that was very inconsistent to just my general belief system. But
Before
like everybody
continue,
else,
just curious, were those stated overtly, or they just
no,
messages?
they were little events that were said to me by my supervising lead engineer.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I continued my career through Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, moved over to Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard was a very different environment than the aerospace environment of Pratt & Whitney. Management by objective, HP, the iconic HP from back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so I had a very huge contrast. Now at HP, I had the opportunity to be very successful in my early years, and then I was given the opportunity to move into management. And my first management position, my first performance review was unacceptable in every category.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Shock. And so I thought I'd go back to being technical, but the regional general manager and the mentor suggested, no, Norman, you're doing okay. You've had some struggles, but hang in there. And I did. I took his advice and I stayed, and I committed to learning the art and skill of leadership, so I'd be successful. I knew how to be successful as a technician, but I didn't know how to be successful as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I spent the next at that time, 13 years with Hewlett-Packard, kind of rising through the ranks, taking on more and more responsibility, but really honing my skills as leadership. In 1988, I left Hewlett-Packard. I was 40 years old, thereabouts, and so you might say midlife crisis, but things were changing at HP and things were changing in my life. I decided I want to leave corporate world and go out on my own. and consulting seemed to be the gift I had, having learned the art of leadership. And so I began to work with clients, doing all sorts of work, everything from helping a client with process improvement and business process re-engineering to strategy and CEO coaching and mergers and acquisitions and turnarounds and interim COO jobs, so just a whole variety of opportunities. And the one thing I kept seeing and noticing was the difficulty organizations were having in executing the strategy, whatever their goals were, not only individual organizations, but individuals. And so I got really curious about that and started to do some research and exploration, and that led me to writing the book, The Living Organization. And that led me to where I am now. So that's sort of the history.
So yeah, a lot to unpack, and I definitely want to hear more about your book soon. But before we do that, you raised indirectly a few points that I think are very valuable. Certainly anyone who's familiar with Michael Gerber understands that the distinction between working in versus on your business. We understand the difference between being a technician as opposed to being more in a leadership role, leadership capacity. What did that look like for you? And what was it about the review in particular? I know you said unacceptable across the various matrices, but I'm just curious to know more specifically as it related to leadership. What were some of those issues, let's say, that were raised, and how did you learn, whether it was personal research, mentorship, etc., trial by fire? What was it about your process that eventually allowed you to now help others be better leaders?
So backtrack a little bit. As I was leaving university, I had a deep personal, you might call spiritual epiphany of the power of love. And so when I moved into leadership in my first year, I thought caring for the employees and loving them and, setting goals would be sufficient as a model framework. What I didn't realize was there's a lot more to leading an organization than just caring for people. The human dynamic situation. So part of what I realized was I was really ill prepared. So I came from the sales side of it, and my first management job was the service business. And I knew nothing about repairing equipment. I figured that's okay. I care for the people. We're all in the same game. We'll pull together. And I got very little. I had a boss that was a very poor mentor, a very poor coach. I remember sitting with him and I said, I don't understand the profit and loss. I don't understand the financial statements that we're managing. And he says, well, it's like balancing a checkbook. And I said, you're assuming I balance a checkbook, so there was just a real disconnect in him understanding my skill set and how he can help me. So I had to learn not only the art of caring for people, but the art of caring for people in the context of running a business. And that's very different. Most people move up into leadership as an expert moving up to leading other people in that same field. I didn't have that capability. I had to literally learn the art of leadership. So how did I get there? Right, you're right. Mentors, coaches. One of my biggest mentors, his name was Jim. He literally he was my peer. We were both district service managers. Then he became the regional service manager, so he became my boss, and etc. And so I got a lot of guidance. And he grew up in the service business, working with technicians. I had to learn that people come from all different contexts, all different belief systems, and I can't just explain things to them. I have to get with them. there's a lot to unpack there, I know, and I'll try to keep it a little short. But that was the answer to your question was recognizing that the art of leadership in the context of business was a unique skill, and I had to
Yeah.
learn it.
Yeah, it certainly is. And in my book, I have a book called Becoming the New Boss. I'll just put in the screen here for a second. The same concept. Just I was in the field of education and moving into school leadership, understanding that the role of being a great teacher does not prepare you
That's right.
necessarily to be a great principal. But it's actually interesting to me, Norman, that you came from a place of love and care and then had to figure out the other pieces. I almost feel, and I could be wrong on this, but I think I'm correct to a large degree, that most leaders are focused more on the other aspects of leadership. They're focused on the technical elements, they're focused on making their numbers. They're not as focused on caring for other people, understanding the team dynamic, understanding that it's we, not me, that ultimately will drive success. So you came at it from a different, I think from a different vantage point. I'm curious to know from your angle, not that you didn't, not that anyone who is listening wouldn't want to have, quote, the complete package, but if you feel that if there was a way to say a certain kind of leader comes in with a particular advantage, maybe this is too theoretical a question, between being very focused on the relationships versus being very focused on results. If somebody had to choose one area, let's put it this way, if you were mentoring somebody and somebody had to choose one area with which to start, couldn't get everything at once, which direction would you point them in for starters?
Wow, that's a really tough one because I guess the way I would answer that is very situational. Um, so key to my learning is the term balance. You position it very well. Is it about performance or is it about people or relationships? And the truth is you need both. So when I work with an organization or a CEO, I look at where are they weighted more on one side than the other. And then I seek to adjust accordingly. I've worked with leaders that are very heart-centered, open, you might even call them spiritual, and they fail miserably because they don't have the capacity to focus on the business, you know. Now, I say fail miserably, they can be very successful if the organization is heavily focused on the performance side, they bring the balance necessary. I've seen it the other way around as well, and same dynamic happens. So it's really, that's why I say situational. Success comes from understanding the situation you're in and where the balance and imbalance is, and then adjusting accordingly.
So as a coach and consultant as well, I'm curious to know, what is your process to determine just what the current or existing balance is for any given CEO that you work with? Are you using assessments? Is it more conversational? Are you visiting the company and sort of listening in and getting a feel for the dynamic? How does that process unfold for you?
All of the above, actually. So yes, there are some assessments. So one of the ways I've helped leaders find that balance, and I'll get a little bit into the principles of the book, um, is I recognize that structurally, or you might say from a paradigm point of view, a worldview point perspective, we think of an organization as a machine. The leader is the designer of the machine, and employees are the component parts of the machine. And we talk a lot about, I mean, there's a lot of language trying to soften that, but that's the fundamental paradigm. That's the way we look at solving problems or facing, addressing our challenges. I ask the question, well, that's highly limiting. There are aspects of it that are very important we want to maintain, but it's highly limiting. What might be another perspective that would facilitate this balancing thing I talked about? And what I came up with, again, from my own personal life's journey, is what if we looked at an organization as a collective of people as if it was an individual? And there's a lot of anecdotal experiences people have, such as you think of a department in an organization, typically think of a sales department, and an image of a persona, a personality will arise, in contrast to an engineering or an accounting department. It's not about the people in it, it's just the collective has its own personality. So what if I, as a leader, my role is really to develop that personality or develop that individual, collective individual, in their performance. And now we begin to apply, I know you got your doctorate in psychology, so now we begin to apply human development principles to leadership, not mechanical principles. I was doing some research for a previous talk, and I went back to the history. We all know a lot of the frameworks of business comes from people like Frederick Taylor, right? And Taylorism and all of that. And I also found that there was a French individual by the name of Henri Fayol, who wrote a book, roughly Administration of Business, rough translation from French. And he set the hierarchy, but they both were mechanical engineers. That was the interesting discovery. I didn't realize that before. And so it's natural to now understand why we have a mechanical engineer's view of what a business is. So what I'm trying to do is shift that fundamental paradigm so we approach the challenges in a different way. If you think of a human development and you think of areas like sports coaching, they're very goal-oriented and very mindset-oriented. They both play an equal role. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's how I approach it.
Interesting. Now you used the term before, and I think maybe you alluded to this even in your last few sentences about almost like the technical elements of business structure. Earlier you talked about the art of leadership. So I know we're talking about two related areas, but not exactly the same. But you always have this dichotomy between art and science, if you will, about the workplace, about the roles that we play and things like that. Is, I don't want to parse it too much, but I'm just curious to know, when you refer to the art of leadership, is there anything in particular that you would say these are the qualities of a person who really gets it? These are the qualities of a person who is a leader's leader. Somebody, if I could clone this person and distribute them to all of the corporations throughout the country, we would be that much more efficient, that much more effective. I know personalities differ, and I recognize that leadership looks different in different contexts, but are there certain overarching qualities, principles in the leadership area that you have found that really, if people could develop them more and better, would serve them well and would serve their organizations better?
Yeah. So the challenge with answering that question, because it's actually quite a deep question, and it goes into it really has to do with I call overall human maturity, and that has a lot to do with principles of transcending ego, humility, empathy, situational awareness. And so now we're beginning to move into the art of leadership is really the art of developing myself so that I can be in honest connection with what's around me. Connection with the individual I'm talking to, not just at an intellectual level, but even to the degree at a heart center level. So we're really connecting human to human. I can be, you hear these terms all the time thrown around in leadership: transparency, authenticity, humility, empathy, compassion, right? But these are attributes that are on a continuum of maturity. And so, and maturity and transcending ego are very parallel, very similar processes. So yeah, the more mature, the more evolved, the more enlightened, if you want to use those terms, the more spiritually developed, and if you want to use those terms, those are the attributes that you will find in really good leaders.
Okay, so to clarify one of those terms in particular, when you say mature, because you used it a lot, in my mind, I was thinking, let's say in contrast with the selfish child who's really thinking about me, and even as you move into the workplace, you tend to be more focused on your own growth, your own development, your own advancement, etc. Is that what you meant? Meaning to say that the mature person is kind of past that and they're no longer thinking in those terms, or did you mean something different?
No, that's exactly what I mean. Somebody probably about 6 years ago challenged me to give my definition of there's a lot of work about conscious leadership that's been going on since conscious capitalism came around in the 2008 area, and there's all sorts of books on conscious leadership. And so they asked me, how would I define consciousness or conscious leadership? And my answer to that is actually what got me to think in terms of maturity. I said, well, it seems to me that there's two spectrums. There's or two axes. One axis is the axis of time and space, or time, and the other is the axis of space. And your example of the child is exactly where I went in my thinking. When a child is young, it's me, and now. So time is now, and space is me. And then as the child matures, that time space goes from me to my family, and from now to after dinner, right? Or next week or next month. And if you really go out on that spectrum, you will find principles like the 7 generations, right? Of making decisions now for 7 generations to come, right? And it's not about me, it's about the planet, right? And so you notice this kind of moving out on those two dimensions. And
Interesting.
that's
Yeah.
you can look at consciousness or enlightenment that way, and you can look at maturity that way.
I'm actually intrigued by the term consciousness because I do a lot of talks on things like productivity and time management. And so I mentioned the 4 steps moving from unconscious incompetence to
Sure, I'm
unconscious
familiar with that.
competence,
Yeah.
right? So the highest level is where I'm so good that I really don't need to think about it all that much. Let's say, for example, I'm driving a car. So let's assume for the moment that I know what a car is and I know I don't know how to drive it, then I learn how to drive it, but everything's a thing, so to speak. I got to worry about all the little details, the mirrors, the gadgets, etc. And then finally I can get to a point where I get in the car and I go and I can be drinking a coffee, having a conversation, listening to a podcast, whatever, because the actual act of driving is so automated for the most part that I don't have to give much mental thought to it. There's a danger there, as we know. So with conscious leadership, I don't want to get too deep into that because that wasn't necessarily an area of focus I intended, but I am curious if the intent there is just that you shouldn't lead, let's say, blindly, so to speak. You shouldn't lead without intent, or if it's that every leadership act should be, deliberate. Because there are some things in our, we don't want to be mechanical and robotic in how we lead. We want to be able to interact with people freely and not have to second guess every decision that we make. Did I do it right? Did I not? What will they think of me, etc. So you want that unconscious fluidity, I would say. On the other hand, you also have to, you can't just assume that just because I think I got the leadership deal figured out, now I can just go on autopilot because every situation is the same. We know situations vary, people vary, etc.
No, you're 100% right. There's really a sort of a paradox between the two. When I first learned those 4 principles, again, during my career at HP, actually, I remember I was on the high school fencing team, and I had a phenomenal coach. He was not a great fencer. He was just a phenomenal coach. He was a conscious competent. Great athletes are unconscious competence, and they make terrible coaches. because they do it so well, but they don't know why they're doing it. And so I began to learn this dance between it. Becoming unconscious, like you said, makes us highly efficient. We don't have to think about adjusting the mirrors and where am I now and who's around me. It's almost like you're on autopilot. And that's good for efficiency. And as long as your current unconscious competence is giving you the results you want, don't do anything. It's perfect. You're oriented to producing the outcomes you need to produce. The challenge becomes when you're not getting the results, what do? Do you take that as an opportunity to say, maybe my unconsciousness is not serving me anymore, and we learn how to realign that which is driving us to behave the way we do, or not, right? And most people don't take that step. Most people go into blaming or defensiveness. It's not me, it's what's around me.
That comes back to the maturity.
No, exactly. There you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And a great leader is capable of guiding that self-reflection and leading to the development of a new eventual unconscious set of behaviors.
Yeah. I pulled something off of your website that I'd like to read to you. It
Yeah.
says 70% well, it's kind of funny because I'm recording this maybe the day after the not so good folks at Columbia University got dragged over the coals by not knowing what was on their website and who's active and all that good stuff. Politics aside here. So it says on your website, 70% of company initiatives fail in execution. And I'm familiar with statistics like that because I've done many trainings on change management. So I'm just curious to know what does that mean? And why is that number so high?
Well, there's a number of studies. One of them comes from Harvard. They did a couple of studies and they looked at things like lack of collaboration. Actually, one interesting bullet point that I found when I read the study was too much focus on performance, which you would think would be what you'd want more of. But the theory behind that was there's such a focus on making numbers. People only care about making numbers, not about solving problems, to put it in a very gross terms. Too much top down. And I think all of those contribute to it. I have added I think there were 5 and I've added a 6th one. We don't understand, again, this goes back to one of the core theories of my book, where I talk about a collective of people, which is an organization, operates like a living human being. If you ask the question, how do we as human beings create outcomes? There's things we do, obviously. So what I call activity is an important element. And that's what the machine model is fundamentally based on, focusing on activity. But we as humans also are always in relationship. So the nature and dynamics and the quality of our relationships actually impacts our activity. It put me in a very conflict-oriented environment, put me in an environment where I don't feel supported by my team members, my activity is going to go way down. So relationship is the second key element. And the third key element is what we call context. And I'll just use what we were talking about, the idea that we develop a set of full of instruction sets on how to behave so that I become highly efficient, right? Driving a car, I start off very awkward, everything is a new input, and I'm adjusting accordingly to where I get in the car. And as you point out, I don't even have to think about it. In fact, most of us don't, and we get into trouble sometimes, but that makes us highly efficient. But then when things don't go right, so context really, and if you think about context as the key thing that drives our behavior, you really need to learn how to pay attention to that. So the reason I think 70% of executions fail, besides that wonderful list from the Harvard Business Review, is we operate from a place of activity is primary. Relationship is sort of there, and context is completely ignored. We reverse that. We believe context is primary. And we have to understand the context of what's going on so we can adjust that, so that we can adjust the behaviors that give us the results we're looking for. And that's completely ignored in our current management theories and principles, and one of the things we're trying to bring into the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to unpack that more. I had
I'm
questions
sure.
about you talked about executing strategy more effectively and rapidly, and change management is always something I'd love to talk about. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to transition into the other segment in a moment, but before I do, I always end this segment with the question that I think is a very powerful question, because whatever successes we've experienced have not been, you know, the hockey stick curve variety. There have been ebbs and flows, have been ups and downs. So tell us, Norman, what was the biggest mistake that you've made along the way that has positioned you for greater success?
Well, I mentioned one earlier, my first performance review, right? Very humbling experience. To go from being one of the top performers in HP, highly recognized, meetings with the CEO, a lowly systems engineer, sitting in a meeting with John Young, being recognized for what I said, into being in management and failing. That's a humbling experience. I would say the second most humbling experience was when I published the book. John Mackey, who was the CEO of Whole Foods and wrote the foreword, which I was honored in doing. I gave him a copy of the book, and he said to me, "Norman, now you're going to have to live what you wrote." And I kind of smiled, and I thought, okay. Well, about 4 years into it, I was walking out of a client's office and realized, you know what? I am constantly being caught into the old paradigm. I'm not living what I wrote. And that was my second major humbling experience, and actually caused me to shift and really challenge myself to walk my talk.
Wow.
Very, very difficult.
And very powerful.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so let's lighten the mood just a little
Okay,
bit.
yes.
All right. So 2 tips. It seems like you've been at it for a while, but you're still young and vivacious. 2 tips to staying young and energetic.
Have a deep sense of why you exist in the world, your calling, your dharma, whatever you want, your purpose, whatever you want to do it. Get as close to that as you can and just live it fully without care, and be who you are.
And number 2?
Well, number one was well, I guess number 2
live your
is
calling.
Don't give in to the myth of aging.
Okay.
I'm 76 and I don't believe it.
You should keep going strong. If
Yeah.
you could write a message on a large billboard along the interstate closest to you, what would it say?
Love yourself and love others.
A nonprofit you're most passionate about.
There's actually a couple of them, but they're all centered around the arts.
How far is your Vancouver in Washington State from the Canadian city that everybody knows?
About 7 hours by car, 7.5 hours by car.
And what's the biggest mix-up you've experienced between your Vancouver and the other one?
I literally have to say I'm across the river from Portland in Vancouver rather than saying I'm in Vancouver, because the minute I say Vancouver, even if I say Washington,
Doesn't register.
oh, it's a beautiful place. No, that's the other Vancouver.
Well, yours might be beautiful too. The best time of year to visit Washington State.
right now, between May and October.
Okay. What do you miss most from your hometown of Brooklyn?
Wow. Bagels and pizza.
Sounds good to me, especially now as we're about to enter Passover. Okay, a productivity tip, and this is the final one, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Stay focused on your goals and open to learning from what doesn't work.
Nice. Okay, so how can people connect with you, Norman, learn more about your work and benefit from your services?
Thank you, Naftali. This has been a pleasure, by the way. www.quantumleaders.com. My email address is nwolfe@quantumleaders.com. I have on my website, if you go to quantumleaders.com/podcasts, you can download for free the first 3 chapters of my book if you want to get a sense of what we're all about. Yeah, those are the ways. And my LinkedIn
Awesome.
profile,
Yeah,
obviously.
we'll have that on the show notes as well. Okay, so before I let you go, Norman,
Yes.
busy day and holiday season in front of us, but I'm still going to ask you one final question to please leave us with a final life lesson that you have culled from your many years of experience, of failures, of successes, of maturing, all the things we've talked about. What's one final life lesson you could share with us today?
I would say it comes to be open to expect what you don't expect, as if it's a gift from the universe. I'd like to say be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Nice. Okay, definitely what to think about there. And thank you again for coming on to the Lead to
Pleasure.
Succeed podcast. It was a pleasure having you, a pleasure learning from you. And I certainly hope that everybody who hears the episode will take the next step, reach out, learn more about your work, and glean from your many experiences.
Thank you, Naftali. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise. Likewise. Be well. Bye-bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.